Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We will get started in just a moment. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We will get started in just a few more minutes. Great. Thank you, guys, for joining. Just give everybody one more second, and they'll funnel in. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar presentation on EUDAMED UDI compliance. Why later is already too late. I'm Leah Wilhelm, Head of Marketing here at LexisNexis ReadTech. And before we begin, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and a link will be sent to you afterwards in a follow-up email. For questions, please use the Q&A section in Zoom here, and we'll address as many of those as we can at the end. Now, today, let's meet our moderator, Rob Leonetti. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Leah. I appreciate it. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone. And welcome to today's session, EUDAMED UDI Compliance, Why Later is Already Too Late. I'm Rob Leonetti, Strategic Enterprise Account Partner with LexisNexis ReadTech, and I'll be your host and moderator today, as Leah mentioned. Leah? Joining me today are two of my colleagues who are experts deeply engaged in the rollout of UDI and the EUDAMED requirements. John Lawrence, Director of Medical Device Product Management, and Grace Min, Senior Product Manager and Subject Matter Expert in EUDAMED and UDI. Together, they'll walk us through the compliance challenges, the risks of waiting, and why voluntary submissions are your best strategy. Let's take a look at the agenda. So here's what we'll cover today: the timing challenges, the risks and bottlenecks of waiting too long, the benefits of voluntary submissions, and practical steps to accelerate your plan. The focus of this presentation is to show that the recent delay is not extra time to wait, but a clear signal that now is the last responsible moment to act. We'll walk through the risks of waiting while managing multiple and conflicting priorities, the opportunities of getting ahead, and how organizations can approach compliance with confidence. We'll also be leaving time at the end for a Q&A session. So here we kick off with the illusion of more time. Many companies think the recent 3-month delay means that they can relax. But the delay isn't a grace period. It's really a reality check. So let me ask our experts. John, why is it so dangerous for companies to think they suddenly have more time?
Yep. Thanks, Rob. So this couldn't be more timely, to be honest, no pun intended. I was actually joking with Grace, I think you all, as we're planning for this, that every time we do a EUDAMED webinar, like there's usually some news comes out within like 12 hours before we give the webinar or such. And, you know, without failure, it happened once again. So I just first want to start off just with an update that there was a medical device coordination group meeting yesterday. And the results of that was, the commission speaking to stakeholders like competent authorities. There's a MedTech Europe representative in the meeting, as well as the notified bodies. And basically, it provided an update on the publication of the official journal of the EU, which, as you know, is the trigger for setting the confirmed compliance deadlines for EUDAMED, including device registration. So what we've learned this morning through MedTech Europe is that the journal publication is now expected in November, so 2025. And again, this is very timely because now folks will say, oh, there's a couple more months here. Perhaps there's I could take my foot off the gas pedal a little bit. What we want to talk about today is, why that's really not, the best approach. So now we're expecting that we're interpreting that with the publication in November 2025, that the UDI module mandatory compliance would start around the May 2026 timeframe. But I do want to stress that these slight publications of this journal entry does not equate to regulatory leniency. the European Commission's consistently emphasized that EUDAMED will become mandatory and that manufacturers should already be preparing. Companies that assume that the delay buys them time risk compressing already very tight timelines once the requirements formally take effect. Remember about once the vigilance module comes in, and if you have any incidents to report, it's a prerequisite that your device is registered in the device module first before you can even enter the MIR report. So it becomes a trickle effect if you're waiting. The distributors, authorized reps, and suppliers must also adapt to these EUDAMED timelines. So any late preparation could risk bottlenecks in their data collection, master data harmonization, and ultimately supply chain coordination. A company cannot control partner readiness once the deadline hits, and you don't want to be that spoke in the cog that slows things down if your organization's data was not ready and loaded into the system. When the official journal does confirm the mandate, again, which now we're expecting that journal to be published in November of this year, identifying a mandate of around May 2026, the competent authorities will expect companies to comply without any grace periods. Like they're saying, you've had all this time. You should be ready to roll. And also the authorities will not differentiate between companies caught off guard and those already planned. So, we really stress that it's the commission's expectation that all this time was already being used wisely, and there shouldn't be any real, excuses if you find yourself in a jam where you cannot get your devices registered on time due to setups and everything that's required. So, I think now we'll kind of get into some more of those specifics as things that you can do to prepare. Leo?
Excellent. Wow. Real-time breaking news, John. Thanks for
Yeah.
thanks
Walter
for dropping
Cronkite.
that.
Yes.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow. And it's still right with all the competing authorities and compliance risk internally. The illusion is time. We can't stress that enough. So here is poll time, ladies and gentlemen. Let's give a pause and answer the audience. Please answer the poll you see in front of me. Which health authority UDI implementations currently impact your organization? We'll take a moment for you to answer.
Yeah.
All the above.
All of the above. And again, it's just even greater than the trickle effect of device registration in EUDAMED, the trickle effect into other compliance requirements within EUDAMED itself. As you can see, there's other health authorities that are going to be expecting data from you as well as part of a UDI regulation. So yeah, I think this is kind of what I'd expect. So folks have a lot on their plate right now, and I think it further speaks to striving to get the EUDAMED registrations out of the way, so you can kind of clear the decks and prepare for these other initiatives.
Yeah, I was going to just add that the 2026 is going to be one busy year.
Yeah.
Some of the manufacturers are required to be compliant with the UDI submission requirement with Switzerland, Australia, and EUDAMED at the same time. And this might be a good time to at least, comply with the EUDAMED and shift like focus to the new regions like Australia and Switzerland.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Well said. All right, we'll move on. Interesting, right? Not early, not on time, already late to all the points just previously spoken. So this slide is really a wake-up call. EUDAMED has been in development since 2012, and voluntary submissions have been possible since 2021. If you haven't started, literally like we've been speaking about, you're really already behind. And again, time is an illusion. It goes by faster than all of us want. So Grace, this screenshot here, this shows that there are already about 860,000 records registered in EUDAMED. What does this tell us about the industry approach to compliance, and what risk remain for those who are still holding back?
Mhm. So if I add like more context on this slide, like we took this screenshot like Monday and I checked the count this morning and it went up by like 5,000 or 5,500 to be more
Okay.
accurate. So meaning that like each day there are manufacturers submitting their record in EUDAMED and it shows a lot. They're taking that this is real, it's not something it may go away. Even though there are delays, they're acting on it now and they're being proactive and also preparing for the other submissions they need to worry about next year. And I also want to point out some of the risks by delaying the submission. Delaying the submission also means they're delaying the learning curve. Like as we all know that the EUDAMED system is not as perfect as we would like to be.
Perfect, yeah.
And I have been going through like for the past 6 years, some of the pains that the industry has to go through to get better understanding of how the system works. So EUDAMED is not like US, it's more complex, it involves more data attributes. Our manufacturers need to understand the validation rules and how the data model is structured, how the submission process works. I mean, that would be same for any other reason, but EUDAMED, they also need to figure out how to make correction in case the data they initially submitted are not correct. And with EUDAMED, it's more complex because once you miss out the time where you can actually correct, there is time when the vigilance module is up and your record is linked to any of like vigilance or adverse event, then the data you have in EUDAMED cannot be corrected. And only way to correct the data is assigning a new UDI.
Wow.
So my recommendation is do this early, and also there is a playground available that the manufacturers can test out the real submission in playground and account for any data issues or submission process issue ahead of time before they make actual submissions in production environment. And that will help them to define their internal process. And also last thing I want to point out is that this EUDAMED project has been costly for many of the manufacturers because it has been going on over 6 years. And each time a manufacturer needs to stop whenever there's delay and resume, it incurs additional costs because it takes time to re-establish the
ramping back up with your knowledge if you paused, right, Grace?
Yeah.
And also there's no guarantee that your research who work on this project is going to be around when the next time it Just one story I can share is with one company I directly work with for the past 6 years. I went through like 3 different UDI project managers. Like every 2 years, it's like we are starting from scratch. We are starting what is EUDAMED, what is UDI. Sometimes I get questions I have this. I thought I answered that question like ago, but this time it's a new UDI project manager. So I just want to share that story.
Oh, well said. So the impact is systemic and holistic across resources, time, and dollars. So even more imperative to start early because of all of that insight. So thank you so much for sharing that. Leah, we'll move on. Yes, and a perfect tie-in to that commentary, the price of procrastination. So here we see the risks of waiting: regulatory exposure, compromised market access, resource overload, That's exactly what we were saying. And failure to align systems. So I'd ask John, which of these risks are you seeing most often with your interaction with manufacturers who are still, kind of laggers, and what the potential, business impact is?
Yeah, I'd say that some of the main business impacts first would just be business continuity.
Hmm.
You're required to have your devices registered or in EUDAMED in order to sell those on the market. So failure to be ready means devices cannot be legally placed on the EU market once EUDAMED becomes mandatory. So even a short disruption can mean lost revenue, competitive disadvantages, and erosion of customer trust. From a competitive disadvantage perspective, and I think we'll follow up when we provide these slides, if you're not familiar with it already, just the URL of the EUDAMED public search. You can look in there, look up some of your competitors to see if they're already in EUDAMED. It's a nice piece of information to have as you, again, are planning your attack, if you will, into entry into the system. Additionally, EUDAMED preparation overlaps with other MDR, IVDR requirements, right? So EUDAMED's a piece supporting the MDR, IVDR, but things such as your PSURs, PMS reports, SSCPs, leaving just EUDAMED submissions until the last minute can create compliance pile up that overwhelms internal resources, back to the resource topic, right? And further increasing any risks of noncompliance with any of these particular aspects. So it's, as Grace was saying, it's different than the US UDI implementation, where it was just a UDI regulation. But this UDI submissions for device registration, UDAMED is one component of a much larger puzzle that you have to solve to ensure that you're remain selling your devices in that market in a compliant fashion.
Right. The business impact is clear in those delays and the bottlenecks, and that we'll talk about actually right now. So Leah, right. So everyone can't submit at once. And this is the price of waiting. So the thousands of manufacturers submitting at the same time will absolutely overwhelm this system, both internal teams and the EUDAMED system itself. We've already seen response delays, not in hours, not in days, but in weeks. And the most recent example was just this past July. So I pose it to you, Grace. Why are staggering submissions so important, and what can companies do right now to avoid being part of that, that final hour scramble when everybody's conflicting in one pipe where the bottleneck is clear?
Our response to that like last year through MedTech Group, we proposed to EU Commission that whether industry could do a volume testing to get understanding of how the EUDAMED could support a large volume of submissions. And even before that, we opened many tickets asking if they could share any performance metrics data, and we never got the response. And the response we got from EU Commission last year is that they haven't tested themselves, and it's not their top of their priority. For the top priority, it's getting all the features in and ready. And then eventually, before it gets fully functional, they will do some performance testing and share the information. But right now, we don't have that information. Without knowing that, many of manufacturers have a concern about that, and they start submitting their record in EUDAMED like right now. And I also want to point out that even right now, not everyone is submitting. Those who act early are making small submissions today. They are running into some issues. Like you mentioned that in July, we had some instance where we didn't get response. And also some of the submission we made, we got late response. And that is the key. Those customers, some of ours who already went through, they have good understanding of how system works, and they're building a process to support that, those unexpected system behavior. And also I want to point out that the manufacturers who haven't yet started, now that there's less than 1 year to be compliant ready. So I think the first key is build a submission strategy. It is important to know where you are with UDAMED submission readiness. If you don't have data collected, then that would be the top of the priority. Have the data ready. If you kind of foresee that, oh, I have too many records, it's impossible to have everything ready, then you need a another contingency plan. For example, you may decide to submit the high risk device first, like class 3, class 2B, because once those are submitted, they will be in UDAMED, and those records need to be reviewed by manufacturer's notified body. And also some of the things the manufacturers need to think about in UDAMED, there are many attributes that are language dependent, meaning that, for example, brand name description, the manufacturers are required to submit all applicable the translation based on the device is sold in EU. And also that some attributes are not updatable once the record is in UDAMED. With all that information in the background, like the manufacturer needs to, what can I submit today? Which data attributes that can be added later once the record is in UDAMED. For example, clinical site information cannot be modified once your record is in UDAMED, whereas the device description, maybe you choose to submit English translation, but later when time is given, you can add additional translation to provide the complete data set. So I'm not saying that just submit English translation now, but add the additional translation later. But if there's no time, that might be a good strategy to think about. But like I tell many of our customers that clinical sites is the most critical one, because once data is in, it cannot be modified, it cannot be added. So make sure you have the complete accurate data, because that information may tie to the vigilance event. So make sure that that information, that some key critical information is accurate and correct. And also some other things I could also point out quickly is that the SOP is critical, because unless you go through the process, you don't know what issues you are encountering. So it's important that you have a well-defined process for initial registration, but also update and also corrections, and also some expected error handling. Sometimes you get server error when you make a submission to UDAMED. It's not because their server is down, it's because one of your data attribute has a bad value, but because of the current UDAMED functionality, it doesn't pinpoint where the error is. It just throws in server error, and it leaves manufacturers to figure out where that error is. And when you run into those scenarios, you need to have a process set up, whether it's something that could be resolved internally, or they may need to reach out to the UDAMED support team. And also, it's not the last item, it's use the playground as often as possible. Like if you are hesitant about making live submissions, and make like a real submission in playground and simulate the correction process and practice deleting and discarding record. It's likely when you don't have enough time, you are rushing your submission, you may have some data issues, and you may submit incorrect data. in this scenario, you need to have process how to resolve that particular issue. You could go either like discard that record, which means you are totally deregistering that record in UDAMED, you start from scratch. Another one is if the data is at the submitted state and waiting for notified body to review the certificate data. In that scenario, you have option to purge. So those different scenarios, the manufacturer should be prepared for, have a well-documented process internally. And the last point I want to make is that at the end, the data is going to be available for public access, which means the manufacturers are responsible for their data.
Mm-hmm.
So we will later share the links there where you can search the EUDAMED data and use that link to see how your competitors' data looks like. Does it look like it's complete, or it looks like they just populate the bare minimum attribute that are required by the system? Because your data is passing the EUDAMED technical validation rule does not mean your data is compliant. For example, you may leave out the clinical site information or packaging information. It will pass the EUDAMED validation check, but it doesn't mean your data is complete. You didn't provide the complete data, and that may be a concern later down the road. So always be mindful the data you send, and it will be accessible by general public and also the doctors and patients who may use that site to get additional information.
Wow, thank you so much for that rich articulation of this multi-layered data requirements and the necessity to use that playground for obviously a number of reasons. I think it's time for another poll. So the audience, please, how did you interpret the recent 3-month delay? And let's take a moment. All right, what do we have? No real impact. Interesting. Extra breathing room. Okay. What do you think of this response, these response metrics panel?
I gravitate towards the no real impact. So I'm happy to see that, because it's really, at the grand scheme of things, it's not like we're talking about years ago where they literally were giving years,
Right.
year delays and so forth. With the extra breathing room, kind of depends on your particular situation.
Right.
You might have been looking at it like you're already up against an impossible task and you'll take any time that's thrown at you, and so forth, to just give you some of that extra breathing room to get it done. I can sympathize with the still not sure what it means, just because, it's many times I've been saying this to some folks, it's EUDAMED information, intelligence consumption, sometimes turns out being like an escape room. Like you have to look at all these different sources and get all this information together until like you can magically open a door and be like, I now know what's going on. So yeah, it's been a very confusing topic. There's references, like I was saying in the beginning of this, to the notification in the official journal of the EU as being the trigger, which then leads to, when they mandate the usage, and then transition periods and all that stuff. So it's a tangled web. But again, in our strong feeling is that's why it requires such attention right now.
Just want to add one comment on that. like everyone knows that in the past 6 years, we had multiple delays. In the past, like I didn't have to wait to know that UDAMED the timeline get delayed, because I can guess that by testing in the playground, and I
Right.
communicate to our customer, yeah, there's no way, they're going to stick with the date they previously communicated. But now, especially this year, the system is more stable. There is not a showstopper to stop manufacturers submitting data. I think that the number, the 806,000 record in UDAMED, that proves that those manufacturers were able to submit. So, as mentioned, system can be perfected, but I don't see any major like showstopper that we cannot submit.
Yeah, like previously they couldn't even, they didn't have enough functionality to even go through an audit, let alone have the audit conducted and, the report made available and notification in the official journal. Total different ballgame now, where it's, all what they deem as the MVP functionalities have been completed and they're auditing those. So it is, I agree 100% with Grace. It's a much different situation. In the past, Grace, you just be like, well, how can it possibly go live? IBDR isn't even supported yet. So it's a little bit more, common sense and so forth, that there is going to be more of a delay. So yeah, definitely echo that statement.
Excellent. Well, moving on, and I think this is a tie into the last slide, Grace. The voluntary submission, it's real, it's now, and it's essential. The system is live, and these voluntary submissions aren't just optional prep, they're really survival. It's absolutely the best way to understand and test validation rules and feedback loops. So we'll continue with you, Grace. What are some of the biggest lessons that you've seen companies can learn when they use voluntary submission?
So I just want to share my experience first.
Of course.
I started working on this UDAMED project on 2018, and today is 2025. I'm still working on it. And in the past, there are multiple UDAMED playground, and each time I read the technical documentation, I do the pilot testing. It's not pilot, I do it every quarter, testing on the UDAMED to see if there are any issues that got introduced. And if there are new functionality, I want to verify that the function is working on behalf of our customers. So what I learned is that this system is not going to be as perfect as we all would like to be, because even recently they fix something, they break something else, and then I pull my hair like, what's going on? But what I noticed that it's not a showstopper, and some of our customers who I work with, like they're at a point, and so am I, at a point to accept the reality. Because as John mentioned, the UDAMED is not just consists of the UDI module. There are also the other modules that dev work is still going on. So that means there will be some issues in UDAMED, but as long as it's not a showstopper, the manufacturer would be able to submit. And also the lesson is to figure out or work with the system that's not perfect, meaning that build a process to work with some of the system issues. I think that was a big difference for some of the customers who have completed their UDI submission requirements. For example, I recently worked with one customer. They had to make like 2,000 submissions, and they made it, but like I mentioned earlier, there are issues on UDAMED, and we didn't get response messages for some of the record that got submitted. I believe the 7 submission, we didn't get submission responses. And when those who are in this meeting, we heard that Mick say that, oh, the UDAMED is not ready. Of the 2,000 records, 7 records didn't get submission response. That's huge compliance issue. And it may be a reason, yeah, let's wait until everything gets fixed. But another customer, I mean, the attendees may think that, okay, it's good enough. At least they registered 1,793 records. So it's the bright side is that, and with 7 records, they didn't receive a submission response. What they did was they opened a ticket with UDAMED support team and provide information that's necessary for support team to reprocess the response file. And what happened was that the support team actually sent us the submission response for those 7 records. And at the end, that remaining 7 records, even though it was like 3 weeks later, we got the submission response and they are all compliant. And while we are going through that, we learned some of the lessons. Depending on what you provide in the ticket, sometimes you get 2 different responses. One would say that if you don't have enough information, the necessary information there, the support team will say that, oh, just resubmit your record. But if you provide a necessary information for them to work with, then they will go extra steps and resend those missing submission responses. And with that particular issue, they confirmed that there was an issue on UDAMED, some submissions, they couldn't send out the response, and they're working on it. But as for this particular customer I work with, they're done with UDI, at least for initial registration requirement. And that will give us time to work on the other, like, health authorities UDI requirements.
I would just add to that, you know, with that whole ticketing process and everything as well, right? So we were talking about resource constraints a little bit earlier. Think about UDAMED support, right? So that help desk, when they're getting these queries and all, it's just, you know, again, another reason that, you know, going through that now, it's frustrating. It took 3 weeks or so to get, you know, the submissions fully completed. But now's the time to spend that 3 weeks, you know, not, you know, third quarter of next year when there is an incident report and you only have, you know, depending on the severity, a handful of days to get that incident report in. You don't want to get into one of these device registration roadblocks because of it being a prerequisite to your incident report. So, because, you know, that 3 weeks could turn into months in the future if, you know, they're going to get bombarded with all different types of tickets across the spectrum. If it's really just that one group, who knows how many folks there are managing that UDAMED support inbox. So just wanted to give them some love as well, too, that they have resource constraint to worry about on their end as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. Appreciate you adding to that conversation point, John. And, you know, as we see the impact of UDI systemically within an organization's regulatory and compliance ecosystem, UDI submission really isn't the end. It's really the starting place in line. So submitting isn't just about meeting a requirement. It supports post-marketing surveillance, global submissions, and also operational excellence. So again, the systemic impact. John, can you expand on why UDI data is so foundational, and not just for compliance, but for the patient safety and business operations?
Yeah, absolutely. So you're saying that UDI enables precise device identification that can ensure, you know, recalls, safety notices, adverse event investigations can be rapidly targeted against the right products without any ambiguity. Today, you know, without UDI, that's not the case. And ultimately, this will minimize patient risk and accelerate corrective action. So when there is an issue, you want to be able to fix it fast. So UDI is absolutely an enabler in achieving that goal. Healthcare providers rely on the UDI data for device scanning at the point of care. This will improve inventory accuracy. You could help automate documentation into electronic health records, finally pinpointing the specific device. Let's say it's implantable that was used on a patient that could go right into their health record, and also reduce human error in the product selection. Quick anecdote on this, and this goes back to when Grace is talking about data strategy, what's the impact of your data when you make the submission? There's consumers of that data. It's not just crossing a finish line that's a date on a calendar saying I got all my stuff in. A few years after the US implemented UDI, they had to go on this whole campaign about getting folks to submit something that was previously deemed as optional, and that was the catalog number. Catalog number was optional in the FDA Good ID Data Dictionary. So, many folks said, well, one less attribute I have to get in to get my device registered. But then what happened was the hospitals who were so excited to have this good ID to finally start tapping into were like, wait a minute, I can't pinpoint, I rely on the catalog numbers. So they had this, conversations with the FDA that turned into a part of the Case for Quality campaign the FDA had to do outreach and say, please, they were sending letters to manufacturers saying, these are devices you have that don't have a catalog number. Can you please resubmit with the catalog number? So, you just got to think about there's people using this data is the whole reason we're even doing it. We're not doing this just because we like, submitting information and hitting deadlines. There's a greater good there. And, getting into recalls, the UDI data enables targeted recalls by batch, lot, or serial number. Instead of pulling entire product lines, manufacturers and hospitals can isolate only the affected devices, which is ultimately going to save cost and will help maintain trust between, provider, manufacturer, and patients. The transparent and accurate UDI data builds confidence among the regulators, healthcare providers, and patients. As I was saying, companies that treat this as a strategic asset and not just a compliance checkbox could really have an opportunity to differentiate themselves as safe and reliable partners in the industry. So it's just the beginning, getting that data in, identifying those products, getting that data in and getting it in accurately so that these goals, these lofty goals that we have where we could, track and trace medical devices in this world, not just this country, could be achieved.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And, it's easy to get mired down with all the requirements that are boggle everyone's mind and lose focus on the fact of why these mandates are in place or being put in place: patient care, safety, and health and disease management. I mean, ultimately, this is why we're all in the business we are in, and what matters most. So, like you said very well, the greater good. Thank you, John. So we'll move on. Yeah, the acceleration of your submission plan now. This slide outlines 4 urgent steps: finalizing data sets, mapping systems, testing pipelines, and preparing for corrections and resubmissions. Grace, this seems to be a subject near and dear to your heart, so I'll ask you, if you had to give one piece of advice to manufacturers who are starting today, hopefully they're starting today, which of these 4 should they first prioritize and why?
If I had to pick one, it would be the first one, the finalized validate UDI data set. So I'm not referring to the technical validation. I'm referring to the data being compliant against the regulation. So, and because this particular step can only be done by manufacturers. As we all know, we are UDI solution provider, but we're not able to check whether the device has a relevant clinical site information or packaging information. That information can only be provided by manufacturers, and they can check whether the data is complete or not. And especially this is important for those who are preparing data for the UDAMED submission, because the same data set will be also used for Switzerland submission. So in August, there was an announcement from the Switzerland Health Authority that their UDI system will be up and running, and their target production submission timeline is second quarter of next year. And what I read was that they will be using UDAMED data extract and ingest that file into their UDID system. So it means the data currently being submitted for UDAMED is also make sure those are valid against the Switzerland regulation. For example, those who only submitted the brand name device description in English only, will that be enough for Switzerland? Those are the questions that the manufacturers should start thinking about. So while still working on the UDAMED data preparation, they're also looking at, is that data good for Switzerland? So they don't have to do additional work later next year when they need to submit their data to the SwissMed, like in the second quarter of next year.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then finally, we'll wrap up the content of the slides before we go on to our Q&A session. Very poignant. It's not early, it's urgent. Regardless of slight delays, you see the complexity and the multi-layer compliance requirements, the impact across all internal systems, et cetera, ultimately to patient care. And this, as this slide articulates, starting now is not early. It's really the last responsible moment for all those reasons and more. So don't be part of the scramble and the bottleneck that's surely to be. Be part of the solution for your internal resources, time, money, market access, et cetera. So John, we'll round out the discussion by asking you, what's your message to leaders who are still hesitant to act now?
Right. So, from a business leader perspective, your hesitation is putting market access at risk. UDAMED compliance is mandatory. Without UDI registration, devices cannot be sold in the EU. So that's very just black and white, boom, yeah. Right? But you can still think, well, you start playing, okay, they just said I have a couple more months, but again, that early action could really equal competitive edge. Companies that are preparing now will secure approvals, win tenders, and strengthen trust with regulators and providers. Think about the work you have to do with the notified bodies as well, too. Get in now. You don't want to be, risking delayed in some other resource constrained bottleneck. There's various resource constrained bottlenecks in this process. So, getting it early absolutely gives you the edge. And just, let's bring it back to the reason why, doing this and for the patients, right? Like UDI powers more than compliance. It ultimately is going to improve patient safety, on the business side of things, supply chain efficiency, and you can leverage it for business intelligence. So you really have the opportunity to make this a long-term asset and not just another checkbox on, did we comply with this submission requirement?
Excellent. Thank you so very much, John. And now, virtual hands are raising. I'd like to thank both John and Grace for their insight, expertise, their articulation of what they see from the field on a day-to-day basis, and the breaking news that was part of this part of this session. So now we could run into our Q&A session with a few minutes left.
Yeah.
Leah, do you want to?
Yeah. So we had a question come in. Do you know if for the PMS module, is it expected to have a specific template for data collection, analysis, etc.? I don't know if that's something that John, can you take?
So we'll have to dive into the latest information that just came out to see what the expectations are for that. So I just have to just admit, like the information about from the medical device coordination group meeting yesterday, we literally received it, got some of the headlines, on some things on, the timing of the publication of the journal, but we will dig in on that particular topic and we could follow up with you, assuming we would know who asked the question and be able
Yeah.
to address that for you.
We do. Yep. Great. And then this one is for Grace. So we have a similar, this attendee has a similar issue to what you described, Grace, where registration went through in UDAMED, but no acknowledgement from UDAMED. And since we didn't have a message ID, the UDAMED help desk was unable to help us. So what information was sent in Grace's example that resolved the issue? If you can share anything about that.
The message ID was the information we sent to UDAMED support team. So each submission payload will have a message ID that is a uniquely data tied to that submission. And obviously we are using AS4 dummy-based connection to submit our data. And also, like another thing I want to point out, you have to be persistent. Just don't take their response. If their response just resubmit data, just keep following up, because the industry expect that the UDAMED returns response for audit trail and traceability. And if you are persistent, you give them the information necessary, they will resend submissions. Submission responses. And I had 2 instances where I provide all necessary information, and the UDAMED support team reprocess submission response and send it to our endpoint.
Yeah, and I know if you're using, our system, a single source, the message IDs and so forth are available within the submission log. So even if you didn't receive a response saying, your submission passed or failed, you can still look to download that submission log. And there's some columns in that log that'll say message ID, correlation ID. And in the instance that we made the submission, we're starting to get acknowledgements, but they're missing the last one. You will see the message ID there. So yeah, this whole point is this is trial and error, but it seems that those submission criteria, like the message ID, correlation ID, and perhaps even the payload, the submission file itself, to help them pinpoint where is your submission.
Just so that if you are working with a solution vendor, you could request that information and they would be able to provide that information. And even further, they would help you with open the ticket with UDAMED support team.
Right. Yeah, and this is something that LexisNexis ReadTech can help with as well if you are running into this.
Yep.
Great. Yeah, these are great questions. Another one just came in. Is there a guideline on what data may be changed after submission to UDAMED, or what cannot be changed?
Yep.
You're all over this one, Grace.
Yeah,
The data steward.
exactly.
So that is an official document, data dictionary, which you'll be able to download it on the playground site if you have access, and we can provide a link later. In the document, it will tell you which attribute can be changed, deleted, added, or not updatable at all. But here is another kicker. The technical documentation may not have everything. You also have to read regulation, because when you read regulation, you will see that the technical documentation says this field, for example, the critical warning data is updatable. For records that are already registered, I can add information, modify information. But when you read the regulation document, it states that the critical warning cannot be updated. I sent that question to UDAMED support team many times and never received email. But in the past experience, working with EU commissions, they have communicated that it is responsibility of manufacturer to send valid data, and EUDAMED system is not required to provide all validation checks. Because EUDAMED allows the field to be updated, it doesn't mean that the field can be modified according to regulation. Not sure how EU Commission is going to, monitor that field that I was just referencing, but it's something we will learn as we go through this process.
Great. Last one I think we have time for is submitting translations only for sizes or using size text a good strategy?
So it depends on which value you use. If you use clinical size type other, then you are required to provide what that other is in multiple language translation. Same with the size unit and size text. So in that particular scenario, that you will need to provide a translation. It could be just in English if that's what's on the label. If under your label, if there are many translations, even though it hasn't been explicitly stated, the best option is whatever that's on the label, you want to include it in your submission payload. I know that I'm working with some customers, and they made a business decision to include all applicable translation based on where their device is marketed, just for public safety.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for questions. So if we missed your questions today, we'll follow up via email along with the recording. And once the webinar commences, you will be prompted to fill out a brief survey. And if you want to continue the conversation with us, please respond yes to the last question. You can contact us and learn more about our solutions by going to our website, readtech.com. And I invite you to follow us on LinkedIn to stay updated on all upcoming future webinars. Thank you for attending and have a great day. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you.
Bye now.